Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, wherever you may be and whatever time of day it may be. Welcome to TEDx Broadway's Conversations with TEDx Broadway. The TEDx Broadway community comes together every week for now to talk about stuff that we think is really interesting and to ask the question, what's the best we can be right now? We're here today with a couple of people that I think you're going to really love seeing. And so I want to walk you through how we're going to do this. We have two guests that are former TEDx Broadway speakers, Jennifer Tepper, who many of you know, and Alton Fitzgerald White, who many of you know. And if you don't, you're going to meet both of them today. And each of them is going to have short comments to share their thoughts on the idea of perspective. And this is a time where perspective is even more valuable than usual. And then after that, we're going to have plenty of time, a half hour or so, to chat with you. There's going to be the ability for you to ask questions in the Q&A functionality down below and respond to what they've said and add your own thoughts into the conversation. So that is going to be a lot of fun. And also joining me today, I'm Jim McCarthy. I don't know if I mentioned that, but I'm Jim McCarthy. I'm the CEO of Gold Star and one of the co-organizers of TEDx Broadway. And very importantly, the other co-organizer of TEDx Broadway is also here with me, Damien.
Hey.
What's up, buddy?
Hey, Jim. We're here. Welcome, everybody. This is like my favorite meeting of the week. I feel like I stare at this screen for multiple hours every day, and it gets numbing. Bringing the TEDx Broadway family together is genuinely really one of the coolest things, and I'm really excited for our guest today. Like, we're going to get really cool guests.
Yes.
I hope everyone out there is well and safe. I just hope everyone's well and safe. And my favorite thing is kind of when the TEDx Broadway kind of comes together. I feel like good things always happen. It's funny, before this, one of the things that I miss most about TEDx Broadway is I feel like when we're all together in a room, you kind of get the magic to see. I feel like you're just more connected. One of the things about Zoom, which always kind of throws me for a loop, is I don't know where anybody is. I have no context of really even who the audience is, other than a list of email addresses. So before we start, just like, when we're at TEDx Broadway, I meet people from Australia and all over the world. Before we start, just to kind of like warm up a little bit, it would be nice if in the chat, can everyone just write where you are sitting right now, city, state?
Not in a chair. You mean geographically?
Yeah.
A chair.
Where are we from? Look at that.
Oceanside, California, Hollywood, Florida, Baltimore, Maryland, Alexandria, Virginia, Miami, San Jose, Costa Mesa, England, Mount Airy, Maryland, Louisville, Kentucky. It's going so fast. Boston, Massachusetts, lots of New York cities, obviously. Olathe, Kansas,
Ohio,
Brooklyn, Costa Mesa. I'm in Pasadena, California right now, by the way, just so you know.
Germany, Canada,
Montreal, New Jersey, Damien's hometown, near Pasadena, California. All right, Julia.
It's
so many
people here. Look at that. That's what I'm saying. Georgia, Ohio. It's beautiful on many levels to kind of see. San Francisco. We got Davenport, Florida. Look at this. I love it. So, but this is what makes me excited. Just even that one little touch point is kind of cool to see everyone together. So, it's awesome to see everybody. We're in for a good time, and let's do it. Jim, you want to take it away?
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, I'm going to introduce, with no further ado, an awesome person and our first guest, TEDx Broadway speaker, I think 3 years ago. Was it 2016? Well, she'll probably remember. But anyway, she is Jennifer Ashley Tepper. She's a producer, of course, of musicals, Be More Chill, Broadway Bounty Hunter, Love and Hate Nation. She's a creative and programming director at Feinstein's 54 Below, as I know from many, many nights going and experiencing what they have to present there, which is awesome. She's also the author of The Untold Stories of Broadway, which is a book series. And I would call her an accomplished historian, especially focused on Broadway. She was named 2020 recipient of the Lincoln Center Emerging Artist Award. And I hear, and maybe we can have the audience put this to the test, Jen, but that you can, if someone names a Broadway show, you can name the theater that it was actually performed in.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Definitely. Okay. Well, everyone just file that away. Maybe we'll put Jennifer to the test on that later today. But for now, we've asked Jennifer and we've asked Alton to share their thoughts on perspective as we go through an experience that's really calls for it. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer. Jennifer, take it away.
Thanks, Jim. Hi, everybody. So during this time that we're living through, I found it interesting and helpful to do research and to think about other past crises in theater history and other past crises in national history and how they've affected the arts and entertainment industry. So we have to start any conversation like this, I think, by acknowledging that at this point, there are so many more questions than answers. But in looking at history for perspective, we can think about what parallels might exist, what might be totally different, and see what we can kind of arm ourselves with for whatever we're going to experience next. I think we all know that nothing is like what we're going through right now, but nothing was like any of those crises as they happened. So that's something that I find it helpful to remember. I've been focusing a lot on the 1918 influenza pandemic and how that affected the theater community, especially because it was such a significant event involving public health. One of the first and most major facts about that is that there was no national shutdown when that happened. When the influenza pandemic in 1918 started really affecting the United States, there was no all the theaters are going to shut down announcement. There was no international shutdown of theaters. Each individual city basically decided whether they would shut down or not. There did start to be a severe drop in sales that theaters and the entertainment venues experienced at that time. People were scared to go out. People were getting sick. But it was an individual decision from each theater. And just like something that we experienced, a lot of shows and producers were eager for the government to issue the shutdown for insurance reasons, so it would feel more official, and not to issue the shutdown themselves. At the time, there was this prevailing sentiment that other businesses would start to get more customers because the theaters shut down, that restaurants and cabarets would benefit basically from the theaters shutting down in the cities that affected that, and that's not what happened. In 1918, the theaters shutting down signaled that that was it, that people should really stay home. Boston shut down, Philadelphia shut down, DC, Chicago. New York City did not shut down all of its theaters, and we will get to that. But at the time that this was all happening, there were actually about 6,000 cases reported in New York, 20,000 in Philadelphia, and 100,000 in Boston. So other cities could be considered that they were more affected at the time. 100 theaters were shut down by the Schuberts alone across the United States. I thought that was pretty wild. A lot of shows were shut down that were in rehearsal, that were about to happen. And a lot of shows were actually stranded in the cities that they were in that were on tour. So in 1918, if you were a show on tour and you had reached Boston, that city shut down and you were basically quarantined and you did not have train fare home and you did not have 2 weeks severance because the union didn't really protect people in that way at that time. So New York City was basically the only major theater city that did not completely shut down. And in fact, there were some shows on tour that couldn't play their tour cities because they had shut down. And so they actually played Broadway instead. They came back to New York and played Broadway. Pretty wild. There were a couple of tours, interestingly enough, that changed their tour routes so that when things did start back up, they would go to the least affected cities first, and they would end in the cities that were quarantined that hopefully had regained their health at that time. The shutdown of theaters in 1918 in the cities that did do that only lasted for a couple of weeks. When theaters did reopen, a lot of public officials assured people that basically the amount of cleaning and the amount of ventilation and precautions that were being taken would prevent further viral infection. There's never been a major study done about this. We don't know exactly how much virus was spread after the reopening happened. We can assume that that did affect how the influenza pandemic was basically proliferating in those cities. The cities that shut down first and most fully did experience the most full recoveries when they reopened. So a lot of the cities on the East Coast that said, this is it, no more theater for now, they did reopen and they stayed open, whereas there were some theater cities in the Midwest that had a lot of back and forth, a lot of opening and closing, and basically those cities took the longest to come back from it. In some cities like Chicago and Baltimore, when they reopened, they instituted a curfew. So a lot of shows had earlier curtain times, and in that way there were some secondary effects about how healthy the theater was after they reopened. Chicago actually shut down in a major way again in 1920 when there was another wave of the influenza. So getting to New York, this was fascinating to me. So in New York, basically there was a curfew instituted by the president of the New York City Board of Health, Royal S. Copeland, a 4 p.m. curfew. And this was because he thought that the major way and basically the singular way that the virus was spreading was because of overcrowding on New York City transport. So elevated trains, subways, all mass modes of transportation were the reason that the virus was spreading. So if he could spread out the hours that New Yorkers were traveling, that would basically curb the spread of the virus. The reason that places like theaters, churches, schools in New York were not shut down is because they were considered community houses in 1918. So you didn't have to walk to the theater. It was a community house. I mean, you didn't have to ride to the theater. You could walk there. Basically, they assumed that anyone seeing a Broadway show could just take their 2 feet and get there and not have to get on any mode of mass transportation. So in that way, the theater was considered safe. I wanted to read a short statement that Royal S. Copeland, president of the New York City Board of Health, made at the time to the press about this. Fascinating couple sentences. It has been the position of the Department of Health that no individual is in danger if he or she escapes the mouth or nasal secretions of some other person who has it. We believe it is proper to keep the theaters and churches open if we can eliminate the sneezers, the coughers, and the spitters. We pointed out to the theater managers the importance of making the public who go to their places know that these things are prohibited. Today, we ordered these managers to instruct their ushers and attendants to escort from their theaters those who violate the department rules and to use force if necessary. We will back them up. So basically, the New York City Board of Health said it is up to the ushers to remove the spitters by force, and we got their backs. Pretty crazy stuff. There were a lot of deaths, obviously, that affected the arts and entertainment community at the time. One of these was A. Paul Keith, who passed away of the 1918 influenza. He was one of the most powerful theater managers and owners at the time. There were many, many more. It definitely affected the community greatly in that way. Interestingly enough, there were a lot of actors who were out of work, who did not have jobs on the stage because of the influenza pandemic, who found work in factories, who began basically creating ammunition for the end of World War I because of this theater shutdown. So within a few weeks of the shutdown, theater really did bounce back. It shouldn't come as a surprise that a lot of the papers at the time said this will be catastrophic for the theater. Theater will never return. All of the producers are going bankrupt. And yet it did boomerang back rather quickly. Now, theater in 1918, obviously incredibly different from what we experience now. An average season around that time might welcome about 200 new Broadway shows, and now we have about 40, which is obviously complex and nuanced and not a direct indicator of health in the financial sense for the Broadway community, but it was different. A show then would announce that they were happening and the tickets were on sale, and 2 days later they would be open. So there was a lot of last minute sales, local patronage. It was very different, but that said, at the time it was thought theater will never recover, and it certainly did. One of the most fascinating things that came out of this was a year after the influenza pandemic of 1918 was really the stronghold for actors' equity. There was the gigantic, really important 1919 actors' equity strike, where actors insisted on protections that they never had before. One of these being that they couldn't be stranded out of town without a train ticket home and without 2-week severance and without protections. And part of this was because of what they had experienced during the flu pandemic. I think one of my major takeaways also from learning all of this is that it's okay for there to be no major red underlined, yellow highlighted, this is what we carry with us from this, and this is the lesson. I think that it's good for me and for all of us to kind of remember that for now we can learn, and knowledge is power, and we can just be armed with this as we experience whatever we're gonna experience next together. And that's my bit for today. So back to you, Jim and Damien.
Yeah, it is tempting to always say oh, we're doing that again. But your point, and I think we were talking about this the other day, is that every situation is different. By the way, I'm fully on board with the removal of the spitters
and the burpers. Yeah.
With that, by force if necessary.
Did just out of curiosity, I don't know if you have this, but really nice job, by the way, Jennifer. That was great. Did the type of show after? Was there a change in either the audience type over time, the type of shows being produced? What was there any more seismic shift literally to the ecosystem of what was being produced or things like that?
Not in a major way, but I think that's because the shutdown only lasted a couple weeks. With things like the Great Depression that caused an even further shift, really what it comes down to is we live in a capitalist society. The shows that are going to be made are the things that the most people are going to spend the most money on. So in the case of the Great Depression, there was also government involvement, but at the end of the day, this didn't cause a major conflict.
Okay. Oh, cool.
I always find it interesting with the 1918 pandemic that they really did not understand virology at the time. They figured out kind of what was happening, but the concept that there's a virus and it's this little organism and it passes along, this was really the dawning of of that branch of science. For those of you who joined us with Dr. Raccaniello, but it is amazing that they dealt with it and as in the way they did, given how little they knew about the science itself. And there's really very little data, right, about the number of cases and even the number of deaths in New York City or any place. I mean, I know it was large in the U.S., but it's an estimate at best.
Well, one of the things when I got the data about how there were only 6,000 cases in New York at the time that all these shutdowns were happening was that they said half of those cases were in 600 homes. So they did have some data about how contained it was. And it wasn't completely not factual that if people could walk to the theater, you know, there was a lot of spread of this on mass transport. That's at least a fact, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jen. We're going to hear a lot more from Jen a bit later. And Damien, do you want to ask the audience, or we're still just doing where people are, right? I mean, this is fascinating. I wonder who our most far-flung person is. Is there anybody? Let's do this again real quick. I don't know.
I saw Germany on here. I'm trying to think. Well, listen, this is from where I'm sitting, I suppose, because I'm in Jersey. But I would say I love this fact that we've got Germany on here. I think I saw Canada. I saw, what do I see here? I saw Texas, Ohio.
Raleigh, North Carolina.
Kentucky. I think Kentucky is on here. I thought I saw that. Wait, I got another coming on the bottom. North Carolina. It's a great. It is like, it's just really the one thing that drives me nuts about Zoom is just there's been a lot of amazing things about using it, but as just sitting here, I just have no context. It's hard. You miss that like larger context, which is what we take pride in at TEDx Broadway when we do the event. It's like a sense of community. You get to meet everyone, and so this is that's why. Yeah.
All right, shall we bring on?
If there's a question, I just want to say now, we'll put it into the Q&A later, but I see it in the chat. We can talk about it later. But for Jennifer, how does she go about her research? What were the steps, the things that she took as research? We can just bring it up later. Just didn't want to forget it.
All right, let's bring on our next guest of TEDx Broadway speaker, I believe 2017, and just all around awesome person. He is a singer, actor, and dancer who broke Broadway records with 4,308 performances as King Mufasa in The Lion King. He's also the author of a great book called Pride, Mastering Life's Daily Performance. He was in the 2019 film The Goldfinch. And, he's a busy guy. He's got a lot going on usually. He's got concerts and tours and speaking appearances everywhere. But when he's not doing that, he's usually in hot yoga or you're kind of a green thumb too, right? Yeah. I'll let him speak for himself. Ladies and gentlemen, Alton Fitzgerald White.
Hey there, guys. How are you? Coming to you from Harlem, USA. And it's a pleasure to have been asked to be a part of this discussion today. I want to start right in with that question. What is the best that we can be right now? I think that the best we can be right now is the best that we have to offer in this very moment, without judgment. That's a very important key, not judging ourselves. This is a very challenging time, and I don't know anybody who's exempt from it. I don't know anyone who can just walk outside and do whatever they want right now without possible repercussions. I don't know anyone who can get on a commercial flight and fly anywhere in the world without possible repercussions. It's a very trying time. Also, best. I think a lot of us, when we hear best in a sentence, we think of competition. I've got to be the best. I've got to do this better than anybody else. And, the real competition is with ourselves and our own sense of judgment, which will do us no good right now. It'll only add to the stress of judging ourselves and judging our perception of what's happening right now. Also, best brings to mind, perfection. It's got to be perfect. And I don't really believe in perfection. Perfection is fleeting. It's reliant on someone else's opinion, someone else's judgment. I don't believe that perfection is attainable. Excellence, 100% attainable. To me, excellence is doing the best I can in any given moment. My best may have been one way yesterday. It may be something different in this moment. It may be something different tomorrow, but as long as we're putting effort forth, it's the best. It's excellent. One of the upsides, I think, of this whole trying time is the gift of time. Time is a gift, and we get to choose what we're going to do with it. Time is the one thing that we will never, ever get back. No matter how challenging it is, it's a gift. I think this is a wonderful opportunity to meditate on things that are really important to us. How we want to show up in the world, how we want to serve, how we want to share. Discovering and rediscovering our purposes. And I say purposes because we should have more than one. You know, I know me personally, I'm discovering there's so many other ways that I want to express myself, and I'm enjoying doing so. A couple of things that I've used the gift of time toward in my own life are, I call them meditations. You know, I call these activities meditations because naming it a meditation keeps me from competing with myself, keeps me from trying to be perfect at it, and really helps to keep me in the moment and the relaxation of expressing myself in these new ways. One is I do these walking meditations. I am enjoying the city being sort of empty and having the sidewalks to myself. You know, yeah, it's challenging. This is a challenging time, but this is what it is. And I'm taking advantage of, like, wow, I've never been a big fan of crowds. For example, I took a beautiful walk a few days ago from 120th up here in Harlem all the way down Fifth Avenue. And it was amazing. I had the time to do it. I wasn't on any kind of schedule. So I'm passing these streets full of these gorgeous brownstones. And, you know, down Fifth Avenue, I've got gorgeous architecture on one side of the street, Central Park on the other side, and passing these beautiful museums. And I rediscovered my love of photography. So I started taking pictures. And after I got down to Washington Square Park, which is like 5th or 6th Street or something like that, when I got home, you know, I looked at the pictures and put the filters I liked and, you know, kind of like put them to where they really pleased me, and I shared them on social media. And man, the responses I got were so wonderful. People who are here in New York who don't really feel comfortable going outside are like, Alton, thank you so much for sharing, for taking me along on your tour of the city. And I forgot that spring is happening. This is a beautiful sunny day that I took this walk. And I, you know, took pictures of flowers, and people forget that it's spring. And I have people who don't live in the city who love New York are going, oh my God, I miss New York. Thank you so much for sharing these pictures. Oh, it's great to see the city still thriving. And, you know, that's a way of nurturing myself. You know, I do this for my own sense of nurturing, which is very, very important to do right now, whatever that means to you, nurturing yourself. I start with nurturing myself, and then I turn it into service by sharing it. Another thing I do is I call them culinary meditations. You know, I've been traveling a lot the past few years, and I forgot how much I really love to cook. So now I have the time to really enjoy the process of cooking, of, you know, heating the pan and putting in the oil and hearing that sizzle when the onions and garlic hit the skillet, and enjoying, you know, the aromas and plating it beautifully, like I would, you know, like I'd expect in a restaurant, because it's, for me, it's a way of nurturing myself. And then I decided to start sharing it. Sometimes I'll share it before and after. I always list the ingredients that I used. A couple of weeks ago, I made some spinach cheddar cornbread. And folks were like, spinach and cheddar and cornbread? I never thought about that. I made broccoli cheddar cornbread. And folks are like, oh my God, I have never thought about that. So people are trying their own recipes and then posting them, and which is really, really beautiful. Again, it's another way of doing service. I made parsley cheddar biscuits, homemade biscuits. You know, as you can see, I love cheese. And it's just been a really, really great gift of, like, that's one of the great things I think I love about service, is that, you know, service starts with how we treat ourselves, right? The first service is to ourselves. And then if you choose to, and there's no obligation, if you choose to share it, then it can become service. I know a lot of us may not feel comfortable right now sharing financially, because we don't know how long this is going to last, and we all have different financial situations, but there are other ways of serving and sharing. I mean, what we're doing this afternoon is service, you know, and what a gift it is to be able to serve. So on that note, I think we should all come together and serve together. It's really just such a pleasure to be a part of this afternoon. How's everybody doing?
I think I'm doing well. Thank you, Alton. That was terrific. So yeah, thank you for the invitation to the whole group to join back in here. We'll have Jen back on the screen. We've also got Stephen Tardik on the screen. that who is going to be our sort of our person running around with a microphone in the virtual crowd, fielding your questions and comments. I think what we want you to do, and we'll catch you either way, but is if you have a question that you want to bring into the conversation, put it in the Q&A box, which is to the right, a couple steps from the chat box, or anyway, you'll find it. And either way, we'll get you in there. But if you've got something you want to introduce into the conversation, please do that. And in the meantime, let's just talk, you guys. Those were both, what we were looking for was perspective on two levels: historical perspective, which Jen brought, and then really more personal kind of perspective. And it occurred to me while I was listening to Alton and thinking about that history happened to individual people, right? Like we think of it as history, but really it was the experience of millions and billions of people. And so, you can never really divorce it from the individual experience.
Right, you can't. And in terms of perspective, we all have a right to view what's happening right now in our own personal way, and whatever we feel about it is valid. I think that's an important thing to know. Like, there are no shoulds right now. It's affecting, however it's affecting you is real, and you have a right to feel that and nurture yourself to balance it out.
Alton, you are like one of the most, I would say inspirational. You have such a glow to you, and every time we ever are together, even by email or social, the touch points you have with people is such a sense of positivity.
Thank you.
In a really nice way. And it's funny, I've seen your travel, although it's changed now, but like seeing it all different, where's Alton now, like in different airport lounges and stuff. You have a crazy travel schedule. One of the things that I took from your talk in TEDx Broadway was that I would say I kind of put it the lens of endurance. And I think you talked about how it seems to me that the way you're getting your own sense of endurance is finding different types of creative outlets, right? Because you're a performer, and normally you're doing that with audiences and groups, and all of a sudden you take that piece of your kind of creativity and put it over here, and then try to reinvent yourself. I'm imagining, right? Find different components to get into your creativity. What advice do you have for? I would imagine there's a lot of performers and actors and artists that are in a similar boat. I'd love any insight that you had in terms of advice for folks, so not just keeping the positivity for others, but also for yourself. You said start with yourself, but just on that lens, helpful. So you gave some examples, but build on it. It'd be great.
Well, as artists, first of all, we're all artists, whether you're in show business or not. We're creators, and we're always creating. We're always working. And I think, when the world is moving the way it did before this happened, we tend to stick to maybe 2 or 3 things that we know for sure, and we stay on that track, which is smart. If you have a goal, you want to reach toward it. But now, really, if you perceive this also as the gift of time in the midst of this challenge, there's time to explore other parts of ourselves. I just mentioned, I forgot how much I love to cook because I've not had time to do it. When I'm in the city, I want to get something, but now to really have time, I'm falling in love with it again. It's something that I want to incorporate into my life as the world opens back up. And we all have that potential. We tend to let ourselves be defined by a couple of qualities and forget that there's so many other personalities, there's so many other aspects to us inside. This is a great time to explore those things and to try and to practice. And with anything new, it just takes practice.
Yeah.
So I encourage us all to do it, to really use this time wisely, whatever that means for you. It is a gift if you choose to perceive it that way.
Stephen, have we got questions coming in from the group?
We do. An early question that came in that we're seeing repeated a bit is for Jen. Just it'd be great to hear how you go about your research process, how you're doing that remotely, and also just in general, what's become your quarantine process that's providing you self-care and keeping you motivated and happy.
Yeah, funnily enough, it's very related. I have given myself the quarantine project of reading 100 books. They can be any books. It can be something considered like trashy, or it can be the most intellectual book. I think that I have always loved reading, and kind of like Alton said, like I, for the past 2 years, have not been able to focus as much on that. It's been really nice to like kind of give myself that But my research, I did a lot of research in the New York Times and Variety and Billboard archives about the 1918 influenza pandemic. I've also been doing a lot of reading books about the Broadway during the 1930s, during the post-Great Depression, and how that really affected things. And that's been fascinating. Like a lot of the books I've read on the 30s, if anyone wants a recommendation, Ethan Morden's book on Broadway musicals of the 30s has been particularly inspiring.
Great. Alton, do you have any book recommendations for people while they're making their way through quarantine?
My Pride, Mastering Life's Daily Performance. No, I'm just joking.
Good pick.
This is, I always recommend, my favorite thing is, I always say, while we have the time, think of someone that you really admire, someone whose trajectory that you respect. Pick up their biography, see how they did it. You realize that there are no straight lines in life. Everybody's lives go up and down and up and down. And a lot of the people that I admire, the autobiographies that I read, so people who, they were popular in one moment or successful in one moment, and then, something happened, they weren't. And then, their instinct said to take advantage of this little bitty opportunity, not because it looked good, because it felt right. And that's the thing that catapulted them above and beyond. And to me, that inspires me that right now, this is a trying time, but it will get better. There are brighter days ahead. And that inspiration makes me want to prepare for when things open up so that I can be the best version of myself then, now, and even more so then.
Yeah, Alton, in your TEDx Broadway talk, the theme was really about service, and you hit on that in your comments just now.
Yeah.
I think that it's really worth thinking about what it takes to be of service now, given that as individuals, we're probably under stress ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We should dwell a little bit more on that, right? Like, because it may feel, and you touched on this a bit, but let's go deeper on it. How does somebody deal with the fact that they feel like they're sort of under siege in some ways, and yet turning that into an opportunity for service?
One of the great things about doing service.
Well,
I'm sorry?
I was just going to say, anybody can chime in, but let's start with Alton, and if Jen has thoughts, or Damien, or anybody.
One of the great things about doing service is that it kind of takes the focus off of you, because you're taking care of someone else, yet at the same time, you're honoring yourself. So it's kind of like, that's the kind of like hidden reward of doing service. And like I said before, it's not always financial. Sometimes it's picking up the phone, somebody that is having a rough time right now. Someone that who is stressed out because of the situation, giving them some time to go, hey, I'm just going to be an ear for you right now. Do you want suggestions? Do you want advice? Or do you just need somebody to listen? I'm going to make myself available to you. That simple thing, that simple, huge thing is service. So it doesn't always have to be money. It's time. Like I said, time is a gift. Giving your gift of time, loaning that to someone who's in need of an ear. That in itself is a huge, huge thing.
I do think also it's a bit like the thing on an airplane where you have to put your oxygen mask on before you can help others. And I think about that sometimes, where you do have to take care of yourself first so that you can be of the best service to others. And I found that in immersing myself in history, which is obviously something that I like to do, that is one of the ways I'm able to be most helpful. One of my big discoveries, which I have to mention because I think it's so relevant to some of what we're talking about, is, people are so panicked about what's going to happen when we come back, and none of us know. But in looking at the 30s, we all have this, we assume that theater runs became longer and longer in each decade, that, we break the records every decade. And the 30s were the only decade that we went backwards. And that seems alarming. When I started to do research, I was like, oh, we could be in for the next decade of going backwards. That didn't mean that there weren't more and more shows that were landmarks and that were remembered. The 30s gave us Porgy and Bess and Anything Goes and the first Pulitzer Prize winning musical. And just because in the 1920s, there were 11 shows that played longer than 500 performances, book musicals, and in the 1930s, there were 0. And you hear that and you're like, oh God, we're headed for some kind of complete, decline. It's not a decline. It's just a different way of thinking about things. And I feel like the more I learn facts about our history, the more that I'm going to be able to plug that in a year, in 6 months, whenever that's going to be helpful for certain people to hear in our industry.
Hey Jen, what about, and Stephen in a second, let's get another question in, but I mean, another major, so the Depression was 10 to 12 years after the pandemic. And then that followed right through the 30s into the war and right through to 1945. So that was a hell of a 15-year period on the heels of a pretty good decade in terms of sales and so forth for Broadway and everything else in the 20s. What we were talking about Oklahoma in 1943. What was Broadway like during the war, which was a whole different kind of disruption and a whole different set of dangers and threats?
You know what is interesting? I was reading about the brownouts, which was when people had to turn off all their lights to prepare for air raids. So there would be times when an audience walked into a Broadway show and the Broadway show started, and then all the lights went off and like every marquee went dark. I mean, this has become a cliche, but so much great art comes out of adversity. I don't think it's an accident that we saw such great innovations and like incredible things happening in theater on the heels of the 15 years that you mentioned.
And you talked, when we were talking the other day, and this may be very familiar to some and not to others, that just the landmark that Oklahoma represented in 1943. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's a fascinating point a milestone in the history of the form.
Yeah, you know, Oklahoma was such a major moment because it was a landmark in terms of integration of the musical, the songs, the stories, the dances, the characters, everything was telling one story, as opposed to in earlier decades when you would be like, here's a character piece and then here's an unrelated song. That's simplifying it, but it really did create a new art form. And a lot of the things that led to Oklahoma, you know, it wasn't just like we had nothing and then we had Oklahoma. A lot of the important shows that led to the innovations that Oklahoma was able to fully realize did happen during the Great Depression, during those last years of World War I, II, as well. And so, you know, you could say that during all of this time it was percolating.
Obviously, this scenario is hitting a lot of different groups of people in different ways. We have a handful of questions about high school students and people who are on the precipice of breaking into the industry. It could be high school students, it could be college students about to graduate. And if either of you, maybe Alton, we can start with you. If you have any advice to people who are hoping after all of this comes to an end of sorts, what people can be doing now, what students can be doing now to prepare for that eventuality?
I say prepare now. Again, we may never have this kind of time to where we get to choose what we want to do. I mean, of course, we still have obligations, but a lot of us have a lot of forced free time, a lot of forced stillness. And kids who are graduating in 2020, dude, everything you need is on your computer, you know, on your phone. Research. Find out, you know, look at different productions and find out what your type is. Find out, discover the roles that you aspire to do at some point. Research them. Be ready when the world opens back up. Get your book ready. Start experimenting with songs. You may think that you're one type, and you know you may see a musical number from a show and go, "Wow, I can do that too. Let me put my constitution on that song and see what I can do with it." Now's the time to experiment and prepare yourself to be ready to take advantage of the next opportunity that's waiting.
I love that experimentation. It's so often when things are moving at a million miles a minute, we don't have that opportunity.
Yeah, and so many times people tell us, you know, well, you're this type. This is who you are. But you get to decide that on your own. And now's the time to really research and practice those things. And the more confident about them you are, the more confident you show up when you step into that room. And, you know, so much of auditioning is confidence. You know, I've seen people come into rooms who were, you know, who sang well, but I don't know. I don't really know them. So I don't know how secure they are. I don't know, like, are they going to be hard to work with? But if you come in knowing your stuff, like, yes, I'm ready to share. This isn't just an audition, it's an opportunity for me to share my talent and my perception of this material. That's more than half the battle. So now's the time to prepare for all of that.
So I would just layer onto that to say, I think we're also living in a moment, particularly in this very short window in the current window of time, I would say, is that you have access to like the webinars and just stuff that the knowledge and access that we have right now is just remarkable. So no one knows how to monetize this virtual event universe. So what happens is there's a lot of goodwill being brought to the table. People sharing knowledge and skills.
For free.
from now for free. Exactly. You
For
would
free.
never get that. I've listened to some amazing things that I would normally not either have the time and or be like, I'm not going to pay for that. Like it just seemed, and so it's changed so much. I agree. I think it's really something to take advantage of right now, particularly if in your universe time is an important, is an asset that you have. Oh, it's amazing, the access right now.
Another thing on that note, we're talking about service earlier, and Jim asked, what can I do, or in terms of service. I mean, look, every time I turn on my phone, I see that some major Broadway star or some major film star is doing a free concert. It's doing a number. Like when you get to see Kristen Chenoweth singing in her living room, normally you have to pay, big bucks to go to a theater. I mean, that's all service. And it's up to us to make the choice to take advantage of it and learn from it and hopefully be inspired by it for free.
I actually think it's like an entirely new art form, and we're going to certainly see that written about in history books. It's not theater, and I don't mean that in a negative way. What we're all doing to connect on the internet and like use theater to do that, it's its own thing that was invented right now while we're living. And yeah, as you said, there've never been more resources available to people to watch, to listen to learn from.
Actually, Damien and Jen, you guys said something that made you were talking about the invention of this form that arises out of this moment, and the fact that we don't really understand kind of the edges or parameters of that form. It reminds me of the what you were talking about with musicals themselves, that they evolved to a point that they resemble what we see now as a sort of a musical. And if that's true, the other comparison that I make is some of this online content reminds me of websites in 1995, where the tools were available, and Damien will remember because probably built some of those websites. The tools were available, technology was available, but we didn't really have a good grasp on the form yet, and it evolved very fast. But it evolved, right? Like the first instincts were not right because it's a new medium. So surely this is the same thing where we'll look back on the stuff that happened during this period, and we'll realize it was the sort of genesis of something else, but we'll also say like how naive it was, or how how realistic it was, or whatever, but we couldn't get where we're going without going through that point. And that's happened so many times,
Exactly.
In new forms.
Hey, Jim, you're a producer of all sorts of live entertainment, from cabaret to full force Broadway shows. We have a question here from Cindy, just about what the return might look like from a preparation standpoint. And what do you anticipate returning to the stage first, and what do you think it'll take to get there?
I think that there will be plenty of safety precautions in place. Obviously, none of us know when this will happen, and it could be a significantly long time from now, but I think we'll be looking to protect actors and technicians and professionals and audiences. I think there will also obviously need to be an amount of time to rehearse, because it'll have been shut down for so long, and to start selling tickets again, and to see what kind of capacity there is to sell tickets once things are safe. Honestly, there are just so many more questions than answers. I have been surprised, though, in the past few months, people that I know everyone's like going through it have questioned whether theater will come back. And it's interesting, like people have always told each other stories since cavemen and cavewomen were doing so. And I think that even as this evolves and we figure out how technology is integrated and safety precautions, like there will always be the need for people to tell stories to each other in the same room in a way that is never going to go away. So we'll just have to figure out a new way to do it.
Yeah, if I can just add, it's funny. Right now, I feel like we're in the zone where the arts and theater are playing technology's game, which is we're not going to win in that. We're not going to beat Netflix at Netflix, and so the power of live theater is so much greater than just the screen. It's the variety of senses, including connection, all those different things. And I think we're in this phase of trying to figure it out as an industry, because there's short-term financial duress, and we've just such a long way to go in figuring out what the future looks like. But it's interesting. You're not going to, because one of the questions here I see is about monetization. And that, that, I guess, I don't know if you jumped to that question, but that's a big one, right? How are we able to monetize these pieces? And there really hasn't been a long track record of that, of how are we monetizing these events and the quality of the events, all those different pieces. And we're in the middle of that right now, trying to figure it out. There's no easy answers to that one at all. Hey, Stephen, I don't know if you've seen anything on that front in terms of the monetization of content.
I feel like I've gotten half a dozen calls from my tech founder friends who have had the great idea to sell virtual tickets to Broadway shows, and I'm sure many of us have heard similar conversations. It's such a different medium. It's such a different space. It's a different product. But I do think, we're starting to hear more conversations just about thinking of Broadway shows like actual entertainment brands and less like a simple event that happens in a room. And so when you think about merchandise, when you think about spin-off products, I think there's so much opportunity that our industry rarely taps into that hopefully this moment will allow us to think about and capitalize on.
Yeah, I agree.
This goes all the way back. At TEDx Broadway, we've been talking about this for our entire history. I mean, we had a speaker in 2012, David Siegel, who at that time was the head of National Theatre Live in the UK, who made a very compelling case for the fact that as an added and powerful enhancement to their onstage productions, which are excellent and everyone knows them well, that NT Live was a really powerful engine for marketing, for revenue, for profitability, for awareness building, and for outreach. If you can't make it to London, well, maybe you can make it to the movie theater in Manchester or Liverpool or wherever. And so I think, one thing that I do, same like you, Jen, I hear people say insane things like, well, this is never, it's like, of course it is. There's no fundamental reason why it won't come back. I mean, some day in the not too distant future, the threat of this particular virus will be behind us. And whether it's, whatever it is, there's some output, but I think there's an opportunity here for people to broaden their idea of what's possible through these media that exist today. Sometimes I think, like, what if this had happened 30 years ago? The limitations that we have on communicating with each other, in 1990 versus 2020 would have been, right? For those of you who are old enough to remember 1990, it would have been.
We wouldn't be doing this. We wouldn't have this kind of communication like this right now.
We'd be on some kind of janky conference call.
I do think that there's so much to treasure in the primitive beginnings of this that we're experiencing right now.
Yes.
We should look to treasure what is special about the way it's being done. Patti LuPone in her basement with her jukebox on off the cuff comments, like that's the magic of this. Like the magic of this is Broadway stars in their kitchens and practicing for a day. And some of the scrappiness, I think we should look to remember when this does become more evolved.
Yeah, like everybody wants to be in the garage with Hewlett Packard, right?
Well, the scrappiness means authenticity, and that's what we're connecting with so much at this moment.
Yeah.
And it's like a certain unity that doesn't exist in any other place. Like the live tweeting and the live comments, I think have been such a moment of connectivity. We're all watching the same thing. It reminds me of the first live TV broadcasts from the 50s and 60s. Like it's very special.
Yeah. It's interesting to think of it instead of I think the ones that are going to win, we have this, it's not an or conversation. It used to be that way and now it's like this. And everyone goes, the old will come back. I'm saying it's an and conversation. When the and comes back, this is making everything stronger. We do what we did and we evolve and think of all these other touch points. It could be magical. If you start thinking about it as there's a lot more we can do together versus just protecting what was of the past. It's like build on it.
I think that's right. If the best we can do, and this is the question that we're asking, if the best we can do out of this is go back to where we were, that is a missed opportunity of an epic nature, right? I mean, not everything is the way that it should be, right? I mean, there's opportunities to take things that are overdue for fixing and fix them, and opportunities to expand into things that. And so I really do think there's a part of the human mind that wants to cling to something that was better than it is right at this moment. But we just got to be more ambitious than that as an industry, as a society. There's stuff that needs to get cleaned up and moved in the right direction. And so that's where I sort of anchor myself in terms of the future.
Jennifer just made me think about something, when she just said, live tweeting and we're all having this experience together at the same time. That's like theater, live theater will always exist. We will always need that there's nothing like that shared experience of sitting in the same room, watching the same thing. We may be perceiving it differently, but we're having this experience together. Something about what she just said made me think that's kind of become even more important now because that's a human need to have that experience, to have that. We can't do it alone. We need other people. We're here we're really brought here to share our experiences, to share our knowledge. So people who say that, you know, theater will never come back, of course it will. It's something that's needed on a base level. It's on a human level.
That's just fear talking, in my opinion.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
just
I loved everyone, like reading about everyone in 1918 being like, theater will never return. We're doomed. Like,
We've gone as high as we can go.
Yeah. Right.
Stephen, what are people asking or talking about that should make its way into the discussion here?
Well, one conversation, we've all talked about how much theater artists and just people around the world have brought and the service they've offered to all of us. One question that came up was just how to avoid getting overwhelmed by the amount of material that's now available to us. So I suppose, Alton, how do you find focus in this moment?
Balance. Balance is always key. You know, I'll use the news. Like, I've always loved the news. I've always like prided myself on knowing what's happening in the world, not just in show business, which is, you know, a huge world in itself, but like knowing what's happening in the world. But I have to balance it. I can't watch too much of it. You know, I get informed to find out what's going on. And instead of looking at it as something negative, I use it as inspiration to go, wow, to hold up the mirror to go, you know what? Quit complaining. You have it so much better than so many people. Let me go back to my gratitude and feed that. But I can't do that without being informed. So whether it's, you know, watching too much Netflix or whatever, you got to balance it out with other things. As I said earlier, there's so much more to us than we allow to come to the surface. You know, I try to balance it out with stillness, with quiet, and go, okay, what's really important to me? What else is going on? And then, you know, so kind of weighing the two. That's what works for me.
I stopped watching news pretty much a couple of years ago. And I did this thing where I secretly, in the gym that I was in, they have these TVs up and they had the CNN and all the different news stations. I figured out the passcode of the cable box and I blocked all the news stations in the gym.
Wow. Interesting. Well, you know, I watch all kinds of news because I like to get different perspectives because, again, we're all experiencing this in our own way. And it gives me a better idea of how I really feel and what my perspective is.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Alton, the crowd needs to know your cornbread recipe.
Oh,
No.
You know what? I'm sympathizing with that request because my mouth was watering when you.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Ina Garten, the Barefoot Contessa, is my favorite chef. So I take her recipes and I personalize them. But I tell you, get some good old Jiffy cornbread, which is already really, really good. And you know, you just want to add, like I think Jiffy cornbread says to add 1/4 cup of milk. I go ahead and add 3/4 cup because I add like maybe half a cup of cheese and half a cup of either frozen broccoli or diced broccoli or frozen spinach to it. And using more liquid helps it to not be as thick as it would be. So yeah, you can use something that you like Jiffy that's ready-made and make it easy and personalize it. You can add what you want. Sometimes I add fresh corn. So the taste this corn as I'm biting to the cornbread gives it a whole other texture and a whole other delight.
I think
Experimentation.
I think we need to get this written down and share it with the group that logged on today. I mean,
We will put this on our Twitter account.
Yes, we will. Got it. It's done.
So, you know, I do go back to the idea that when there's something that's ending, but the new thing hasn't really emerged yet, it's really easy to feel like you're at the end, but in fact, you know, you're at the beginning, right? And like that idea is for me a very exciting one, where you go like, okay, it feels like the end, but actually, you know, history's not ending. The world's not coming to an end.
No.
It's the beginning, and so that's much more exciting, you know, to look at. I think
this is a great time for discovery. You know, in the midst of the challenge and the uncertainty, this is a great time to discover. I love that we're talking about, you know, we don't know how to monetize this yet. We don't know how tickets will be sold in crowds. These problems will be solved, but it's exciting to be in the midst of it. It's exciting to see experiments happening. in the world. And, you know, we have that same potential. We're allowed to do the same thing in our own lives. Figure out how we want, you know, how do I want to represent Alton when I don't have to go outside and wear a mask and can really be me? You know, who do I want to be then? For myself, as a gift to myself, and then how do I want to share that with the world? It's an exciting time too. You know, there's yin and yang in every situation. Yeah, there's challenges, but there's like tremendous beauty will come from this. Tremendous art, as Jen was saying. You know, in times like this, when it's really trying, this is when so much beautiful art is created. So many beautiful songs are written, so many beautiful poems, so many great plays and musicals will be written as a result of what we're experiencing right now in the thick of this.
You know,
That's exciting.
Every year I talk about how there's 2 million empty seats on Broadway, and what a shame. And we right now we're going to have significantly more than that. And I think some of the questions about accessibility, I think this is that moment. And so I always think about all the things that people have been fighting for. And now all of a sudden, this is that reset moment, because the reality is there's a lot of financial interest and incentives to being way more open-minded to make sure that we're getting people in. And Broadway in particular is going to really need this moment to reconnect with the local community. And if we do it correct, you think about the long game of how that's successful. If we miss this opportunity, it's mind-blowing. It'll be
might never come again. Might never come again.
It would just be so, we cannot miss it. And
right.
Going to the fall, there's just so much opportunity for students. There's a massive opportunity, and New York City needs it. I mean, think about kids out of school this period of time. Think about the achievement gap going backwards right now, the wrong direction. And during this period of time, as kids are out of school, and all of a sudden we're gonna have this amazing art form. Knock on wood, comes back in the fall, in the fall, winter, whatever that looks like. There's an opportunity to that I hope we take advantage of.
And tie back into what I said earlier about service, you know, and I'm glad Jen reminded me of this as well. You know, service begins with us and how we treat ourselves. So I think the better that we nurture ourselves, the better capacity we will have to serve others and to serve the problems and to find solutions for everything we've been discussing today.
You know, on that note,
Before we close, we got some small thing or some last thing from the group that we get in before, as we're getting close to the time. So
there was a really good question from Arena about how, when we come back, do we make sure that accessibility and inclusion remains top of mind? And actually, Damien, I think in a lot of ways, you tapped into that. It's looking at the opportunity we have and how that can incorporate that. But if anyone has additional thoughts on how we prioritize those in our next act for Broadway.
Just like to quickly build on what Damien said too, the shows and the things that succeed when we come back are going to be what appeal to the most people, period, because that's what we're going to need. We're going to need to embrace those younger audiences, differently abled audiences. And so that's actually helpful in thinking about how we can make things inclusive for them, because it's just what's going to be needed. Yeah.
I think that I have a feeling that people are going to want to be cheered up. They want to see happy things. I think a lot of people will want that, but I think there's going to be a large amount of people who will want to see something real, because a lot of our hearts are being opened right now. Those of us who may be doing better than some others, you know, a lot of these frontline people, what they've been going through, those stories are going to want to be told. And there's a diversity amongst that. And so I think they will find a voice. I think it's a voice that will want to be heard and understood and tapped into.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody, Damien, Stephen, everybody who's made today's conversation possible, but especially Jennifer Tepper and Alton Fitzgerald White. Thank you guys. That was a lot of fun.
This was a blast. Thank you. It's an honor to have been here.
You guys always show up. And I say that when you say being generous with your time, you two in particular, Alton and Jennifer, you always show up, and it's not just words, you literally do it consistently and you give your time to folks. So thank you.
It's a pleasure.
I will let you know that next week at this very same time, we are going to be having a conversation with two other people that you just can't miss. And that is Mark Fisher and Natasha Sakos. Again, former TEDx Broadway speakers. And the theme next week is just unbridled freaking positivity. And these two have weaponized positivity in a way that if you know them or if you've encountered them, you know what I'm talking about. So drop in on us, register at tedxbroadway.com/virtual. I think all of it's there. We'll send a recap of this and a link to the recording to everybody at some point in the next few days. And Damien, you got anything else before we close?
No, be well, be safe, and thanks for coming. Look forward to next week. It's always a
All right. We'll see you next week. Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.